Skipster is the guest management platform used by top event teams for everything from guest lists to seating charts and online invitations. If you're looking for next-generation event software that helps deliver perfect guest experiences, head over to Skipster's website. It's Skipster, ZKIPSTER.com to try a free event.
Are you a follower?
9, 8,
Okay, so we're gonna call the
Welcome to GatherGeeks, a podcast by BizBash, the place where people passionate about meetings and events come together. Here are your hosts, BizBash CEO David Adler and Editor-in-Chief Beth Kormanik.
Welcome to GatherGeeks. David is away this week. Our guest today is Russ Lidstone, Group CEO for the Creative Engagement Group, which is a London-based collection of experiential, digital, and employee engagement agencies. Lidstone describes his career as a series of happy accidents. He's going to discuss his unusual company model and whether others should adopt the model of having a collection of separate brands with different specialties under one umbrella. Lidstone also will share smart tips for recruiting and retaining good employees, ways new technology and formats can increase and help measure event effectiveness, the rise of microcontent, and more. Let's listen.
So let's just start. I wanted to talk about you've had the chance to sort of remake your entire world. You came from a huge company and now you're putting together this group.
Yeah.
I want to know, why are you so jazzed up about the event side and the live experience side of the business? And did you always know this intuitively, or is this just something new?
Well, I always describe my career as a series of happy accidents. And I think, I often advise people when I talk about careers to always have an ear open as to what the next opportunity might be. Not because because of a lack of loyalty, but because you can have a 5-year plan, you can have a 10-year plan, you can have a career plan. But I think if you stick to a plan too much, you can miss sometimes things that are in front of you. So did I ever plan on ending up in events? No, not really. I didn't even plan on ending up in advertising, to be honest. So as you know, I spent most of my career in marketing communications, and on the advertising side, having set out at Coca-Cola and then working on the strategic side for a range of different agencies. And the interesting thing in my latter years in advertising was that we were finding ourselves trying to create content that could be amplified. And often the go-to place for that kind of content was to try and create some kind of event or experience that then could be amplified, whether it's for a bank or for an alcohol brand or whoever. And as part of that, I realized that as someone who grew up reading Pine and Gilmore's Experience Economy back in whenever it was, 98, that actually this experiential experience economy event type mentality was starting to proliferate, and that actually it's becoming a more important part of a client's armory, if you will. And that actually, as we all faced the challenges of the digital marketing communications landscape, the challenges around broadcast advertising, the challenges in PR, and so on and so forth, that actually the experience and the events were greater and becoming more potent ways of engaging audiences, whether they be B2B or B2C.
So when you say, I'm going to interrupt, I'm sorry. When you say the challenges of PR and other marketing channels, was the challenge the lack of breaking through? What were those challenges that events became sort of a better choice?
Well, I think we all bought the notion, didn't we, for a while, that actually digital marketing, digital advertising, and I'm not poo-pooing it by any stretch of the imagination, but certainly digital advertising was the answer because it measured. And actually, a lot of people jumped off the cliff like lemmings, following that sort of dream. But then realizing that actually clicks don't mean engagement. And even though you can measure it, doesn't mean to say that you're getting necessarily the result that you want. So I think, the landscape that all our businesses operate in of blurred lines, of a multifaceted range of channels, finite resources, that questions that were being asked, certainly from a marketing point of view, were what's the most effective way of trying to engage my audience? Is it better to reach a smaller number more deeply and necessarily go down the broadcast model? Is it better to do that and enhance it and utilize it from a campaign perspective than it is to, just focus on pure SEO and the rest? So I think the landscape was shifting massively and continues to do so. And face-to-face and the ability to create a deeper level of engagement through face-to-face and indeed through the technologies that enable you to amplify that content become more potent in an armory and of a business and from a marketing perspective.
So when you now have this chance to create this agency of the future, is this what you think is the model going forward? The idea that you created this agency with different brands that do different specialties, as opposed to merging everything into one big agency and things like that. Is that sort of the way people have more trust in what's going on?
Well, I think,
or is it opportunistic?
I don't think there is. Yeah, I don't think there is an agency model anymore. I think that what's interesting over the last few years is, as I've explored different areas of business, whether it's in learning, employee engagement, medical training and engagement, the event marketing side, the broadcast advertising side, there are lots of companies out there doing some interesting and different things. We obviously now are a business of scale that have those component parts. We have a range of services that in combination represent an unusually shaped business. And I know that because when we set out, when I joined the business 3.5 years ago, we were held by private equity. And as a result of the sale process and the level of interest that we got as a relatively young group, we could see that scales were falling from people's eyes because it was just an unusually posed organization and represented something different. So is it an agency of the future? I think we're shaping ourselves to be in areas of growth. So whether it's the events and experiential side, film content, but more micro content and short form content, immersive technology, VR and AR, but strategically in learning, strategically in employee engagement, scientific engagement and brand activity, I think we're positioned well to face challenges. I think the key part of our DNA, though, that makes us well positioned for the future is a belief that we've not got it right, the belief that we're always going to need to challenge ourselves, and that kind of constant sense of dissatisfaction sits in our DNA. We maintain that we're always flying the plane and putting the wheels on, because I think if you stop thinking that, then you'll probably get lulled into a false sense of security about your position in the marketplace. One of my favorite notions is the notion that an expert is someone who's stopped thinking. And we don't want to be experts. We want to be constantly challenging ourselves and working with our clients to work out how it looks going forward, not just now.
So what does that look like in terms of, is it challenging yourselves in the meetings? Is it bringing in other people? How do you put that into your DNA? Because it is easy to be complacent.
I think, first of all, the nature of our business, the history is quite interesting in the sense that I think a private equity mindset, we sold the business a couple of years ago, but we maintain a private equity mindset. And by that, I mean, we're constantly reviewing how we can create value for our clients, but also value in the business. And I think that leads to a more questioning mindset and an entrepreneurial mindset. So that's I think, part of the philosophy of certainly myself and our leadership team. But as you say, I think it's very much about the people. We're a human capital organization. We are nothing without our people. And so when we look at hiring talent or bringing people into the organization, we want people who are a bit restless, who demonstrate the degree to which they are questioning and not necessarily, they accept the status quo, but want to kind of move it on. And I think it's easy to say, harder to do. And I think inculcating that sort of feeling within a culture and within an organization, it certainly comes from every level in the organization. And I think it's about any organizational change requires moments of reevaluation, I think. And we're very quick to celebrate successes where we've made a difference by doing something differently or bringing a new capability in. So, the examples within our business are 41, which is a brand that we launched about 4 months ago, I think. It's an employee engagement brand. It's called 41 because it's the average age of employees in our biggest markets, the US and the UK and Europe. And it's a strategic service that we could see represented an opportunity to help our clients, but also from a business point of view, just gave us more traction to be able to deploy our services, whether they be in live events, immersive technologies, and so forth. And that was a decision that we took probably 8 months ago. We found the right people to head up that operation. We did look at acquisitions, but thought that the best way of doing it was to grow our own. And we've made it happen. And now that business is really going from strength to strength and almost delivering, what we set out for it to do. In fact, it's probably exceeding our expectations. So that's a good example, I think, of us, creating something quite significant off the back of that restlessness.
Can you go into like what you're doing in that business that enables employees to feel learning about what you're supposed to do, taking the DNA and spreading it around, and also keeping people excited, especially when in our business, it is so labor intensive and you're so exhausted after something that you want to throw in the towel sometimes because it's so demanding. What do you do? What is the secret? If you were going to advise other people to start the 41 type of business, what is it? What is the main reason for the employee engagement? What do you do that makes it different than what people would normally do with their HR departments, let's say?
Well, so it's an offering that we provide to our clients, and so it's a strategic service, and our business is evolving. I know that we'll talk a little later about how the event space is evolving,
right.
But one of the key things is that the event capability and the requirement of from an events point of view is becoming more strategic, and more of our capabilities and the work that we were doing, be it in events or film, digital, training, was facing inwards to organizations, let's call it that. And more of our clients were sort of saying, this is brilliant that you're able to deliver these events and actually help us with our intranet and deliver the content across a number of different platforms. And you're creating microfilm content for us to deliver against the CEO message and the agenda of the C-suite. How do we choreograph all that? What are the channels available to us? How do we use internal social? How does it deliver against the purpose of the organization? How do we make an organization more consumer-centric or customer-centric? And those questions across a number of our big clients, organizations, as you would know, of hundreds of thousands of people is a massive challenge for organizations today, client organizations. And we could see that, A, we could help because we have a view about all those different channels and we're very good in all of them, but also because strategically it felt that there was a bit of a void.
Do you think I see this exactly what's going on is that the internal event departments are happening for employee relations, and that it used to be you never spent any money on it. Now we're finding that it could be the whole ball game in many cases, not the whole ball game, but it's a critical piece. Yeah,
well, there's some great data out there, and I'm sure you and your listeners will kind of have been exposed to it. But if 30% of employees say that they're engaged in their organization, or 22% of executives say that their companies are good at building differentiated experiences, but yet 80% of those executives say employee engagement is absolutely a priority, then there's a massive gulf between the ambition and the recognition that this is really, really important, to believing that they're delivering as well as they could do, and a real willingness to embrace external help in delivering that. Yes, we're seeing a lot more sort of focus on it internally, and I think it's interesting coming from my background, because I think a lot of the advertising skill sets that used to be the domain of that industry are now being deployed much more readily for communication challenges like employee engagement. So when you think about it, developing and evolving a strategy, creating content and utilizing the channels available to you, from live events through to film content, intranet. I mean, something like 80% of internet traffic these days, well, online traffic is video, or will be by 2022. So, video becomes more important. User-generated content becomes important. And in all that mix, how do you differentiate a message about health and safety to a message from the CEO, to an update about a brand launch, to compliance critical information or training. How do you make all that, how do you choreograph it for 100,000 people? And I think that's a fascinating challenge, because it's a massive strategic communications challenge. And actually, for many organizations, internal comms was almost the last, area of the business that people would turn to. And I think that's switched massively now.
Yep.
And equally, you've got to try and prevent your employees from thinking, I'll go and work at Google or Facebook or whoever it is.
Yep.
We're up against different competitors now as agencies, but actually, as a big pharma client or a big professional services organization.
Sure. When you, what is your training program like in between the intra companies? Then how do you keep people up to speed?
So the way that we're organized is that we view the companies are one, the brands are one. So the creative engagement group is, we look at the performance of the group as a whole. We have different operating divisions, if you will, that specialize in specific areas as you've described. So WRG, the preeminent events and experiential business, The Moment, which is a film, digital and immersive technologies business with a strong disposition in learning. Axiom, which has a medical engagement, scientific engagement and medical training business. Just Communicate, which is a very strong event business that focuses very much on the biomed space. And then 41, which we just discussed, in the employee engagement space. We're a house of brands rather than a branded house. So the brands represent marketing propositions that make it understandable for clients and our own internal organization about what we are offering in those divisions. But we see the world as one. And, I think if I have one big learning from my time in Havas or IPG or wherever, is that one of the biggest issues that prevent success in those organizations is parochial P&L management, because ultimately people don't want to share or necessarily reach out to other organizations within their company to provide a better solution for their clients. I know that things are shifting with WP and Omnicom and so forth, but the very nature of their businesses means that, in terms of operational company management, people are protective about their P&Ls. Our philosophy is very different. We don't care about the individual P&Ls, we care about TCEG. So in answer to your question, how do we inculcate that sort of sense of a broader perspective? Firstly, it's about explaining. My philosophy on leadership is to be as transparent as you possibly can be, to talk about the ambitions for the organization and report where we are. And a big part of our growth ambition is predicated on the combination of services. The word integrated is far too overused, but it is the ability to choreograph our services in an unusual way on behalf of clients to deliver against, quite hard commercial objectives. But that's all well and good. And of course, that means that people, should get paid a fair salary. They should be able to enjoy working in nice environments, and they should have nice benefits and experiences as a result of working in an organization like ours. But really, fundamentally, the reason why they come to work, or they will continue to come to work and repay us with their loyalty, is because of their personal growth. So our philosophy is that, if you've spent the last 5 years working in the events industry, or you've worked in digital for 10 years, actually you get the opportunity within our group to work on projects that you won't have worked in before. The idea of being slightly scared, not in a bad way, but in a good way, because you're doing things that you've not done before. You're learning and being taught new skills on the job is really fundamental to retaining and attracting talent. So underpinning it all is the opportunity to do new and exciting things in areas where you may not have done it before. And 41's a great example of that. Axiom's a great example of it. Those parts of our offer now work across many of our clients and are touching many of the other disciplines. And so people are getting exposed to it, are excited by it, they understand it, and that's what drives them, I think.
So where is the next generation of talent coming from for these kind of companies?
Well, I think my description of talent is it's more about aptitude than it is talent. I think that we're talking about people who are going to have maybe 4 or 5, maybe more careers, and some of the jobs they'll end up doing don't exist yet. So the first thing is we are keen to engage people who are interested and interesting. So they're interested in what we're doing, but they also have an interesting point of view about how different things work. That they're fascinated by brands and they're fascinated by company organizations, whether it's in logistics or whether it's in our environments team or whether it's, you're a digital developer. I think understanding where your work ends up and how it impacts the client is really fundamental. So I think it's about a mindset. I think it's about aptitude, because aptitude is about, yes, it's about knowledge, but it's also about the ability to flex and develop based on circumstance. And that's really, really important for a business like ours. And I think because we are, a 3-year-old group, although some of the component parts of our group are older, we have a salience objective, which is just to become better known as a group of companies. And that has an impact on talent as well. So we need to attract people into our organization, some people who may not have heard of us. That is changing, actually. But, one of the things that we need to be able to do is to enable those people coming in to understand what the opportunities for their personal growth will be. And I think what's exciting about that is that it can relate equally to me as CEO. I'm just so excited about being faced with new challenges and exploring new areas that I've not considered before. It's so different to my old world. But it can also apply to, one of our delegate managers who's working on a job for a big financial services client who is actually using new technologies as part of the job, but maybe also as part of the overall offer in partnership with our environments team and our immersive technology team. And I think that's exciting. And the ability to move people around an organization like ours is one of the biggest joys I think you can have as a leader, because you can see people getting excited about doing new things. You can see them getting personal growth. And I think there's a huge amount of personal pride in future-proofing people's careers, because if you work in a business like ours, hopefully it's only going to help your future prospects versus, let's say, you spending your 10 years in advertising.
Right. Now, if so, how are you I'm trying to ask this question as a CEO myself. When you see somebody and you hire talent, are you now good at sort of saying within a few minutes, this is the guy or this is the woman? Or do you go through the whole scientific piece and then come back to justify your original gut feeling, or do you just go with it? You know what I mean?
I maintain that I have a 30-second rule.
Oh, okay. This is what I'm getting at. Good.
So I think 9 times out of 10, I can judge within 30 seconds whether someone's going to be right for us or not. That may sound a bit glib, but
I don't think so.
Go back to some of the values that we just talked about: being interested and interesting, having aptitude, being personable, demonstrating a team mentality is so important to us. Because if you're not a team player, then you're probably not going to perform particularly well for us. And for me, it's really, really important that I maintain that none of us is more important than anyone else. So that is a really important part of our culture. So our receptionist here, Charlene, is as important as me in this London office, and we try to behave in that way. And then I think the way that people engage with all members of our team says an awful lot about them. So if they've come to me for an interview, even at a senior level, how they engage with my assistant or receptionist, it tells you an awful lot about people, and I think you can overlook those things. So I think I'd maintain that I have a 30-second rule based on also good guidance from people who I really trust around people and culture.
Building a memorable experience for your guest means planning every detail right. Skipster is the guest management platform designed to help you create the perfect experience, from impressive online invitations to seamless check-in at the door. Get started at Skipster, spelled ZKIPSTER.com, for a free test event.
I think that's been challenged slightly in the US, I'll be honest. I think that we've got a burgeoning business in the US, and it's growing really nicely. It now represents over 30% of our income versus 23% a couple of years ago. We're really really moving things on in our Philly area of the business that have ambition for more. But I think there are cultural nuances and differences in the way that you hire, and I think it's harder to read sometimes American talent, because I think American talent is often better schooled at presenting themselves at interview, and often quite harder to check out, particularly for a young business like ours, where we're just less well known in the US at the moment versus maybe some of the bigger competitors.
That's so interesting. So do you find, I'm sure you're getting better at it, but I mean, it's hard to hire anyway. I mean, hiring people and talent, recruitment is critical.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the best bits of advice I was given was the real issue is not making a hiring mistake. It's not recognizing that you've made one fast enough.
Yes.
So, I think if you get to a certain point in your career where you realize actually you're going to make hiring mistakes.
Oh, totally.
And particularly when you're in a young company or a company in a different market. And the truth is we need people in the US, and we're increasingly getting them, people who speak American and have their American black book and who know how it works better than someone who's sitting in London and Manchester or Plymouth in the UK. So I think coming to that conclusion is helpful. I think it's quite cathartic and liberating to know that you are going to make mistakes. You don't want to make them,
sure,
but there's no point in sitting around and moping about it. If you've made a mistake, then it's only fair to the people involved and yourself and the company that you try and move on that faster.
Have you had success in bringing people over from other companies into a new market like the US?
Well, the US is actually founded off two of our people from the UK who basically fancied setting up an office. And we built it around some key clients, one in particular. So we had some traction. But, setting up from scratch was quite a challenge.
Yeah.
And the fact that today that business, in combination with the Axiom offer in the US, it now represents over a third of our business, is wonderful because it's only 5 years old. So that is great. But we, as I say, we're restless and we want to kind of keep moving it on. And we have the opportunity now, as part of our new owners, or I say new, we've been owned for 2 years by Huntsworth PLC, and they're brilliant at supporting us in terms of our strategic initiatives and how we evolve. So, the US will continue to be a key part of our growth ambitions.
So let's switch over to the business in general. The power of face-to-face, we've discussed that already, that this is sort of the kind of the secret sauce.
Yeah.
But are you seeing that, and we talked about strategy, do you see the idea that the strategy of using events first is more popular now than it's ever been because of that? Or is the older advertising marketing mentality still fighting for the event space? Or is there a battle between the event agencies and the marketing agencies and all the different types of agencies?
Yeah. I think I say this as someone who's actually worked in the events industry per se for about 3.5 years. But even in my time in the business, I think I can discern a noticeable shift in the focus and the emphasis and the importance of events. And by events, I mean everything from meetings to B2C consumer events.
Sure.
And I would say that was something that I was observing in my last years in advertising for the reasons that I outlined earlier. But I think the really interesting thing is that as an agency now, and obviously at the core of our business is a very strong event marketing capability, from the live event production through to the environments and logistics and all the component parts that support. I think my observations would be that, firstly, unlike actually advertising, often the work that we do is very much in the focus of and important on the agenda of the C-suite in some way, shape, or form. So in B2B events, the degree to which we might be working with very senior people in organizations and helping them with the content and the strategic delivery of that content and how that will be disseminated through an organization means that actually the relationship with key stakeholders I could argue, much stronger than often advertising agencies, because whilst ad agencies do have strong relationships at senior levels, often it's marketing that's the kind of key decision maker in your health as a business and relationship. But what I think is interesting about events is, and from our point of view as a business, is we engage with the C-suite. Often we're delivering agendas for and content on behalf of CEOs, and the cascade into key component parts of the business, whether it's HR or finance or marketing and so forth. We engage with brands and brand marketeers. We will engage with event marketing teams if clients have them. We also engage with digital leaders within organizations. We are involved with L&D, we're involved with HR. And one of the key parts of our business is procurement. We have a very strong procurement and commercial finance team who engage with procurement on the client side to make sure that we're able to demonstrate the value, the efficiency, and the effectiveness of what we do. And actually, procurement, when in my old world, was deemed to be a bit of an enemy, and actually, you could say that that's the case across lots of organisations, that there is a perception that that's the case. But we find that actually, if we're able to engage with them, able to talk about what it is we do, which is quite complicated, in a way that is transparent and talking about the value that we're able to bring, then they can become equally a very important buying point for us within client organizations.
Well, but the interesting thing about the relationship with the C-suite people, this is part of a question. Once they experience the idea of the face-to-face relationship, do they become total advocates once they see how valuable it is? I think I'm going to answer my own question, but that's what I see as one of the values of what we do, is that they all of a sudden, their eyes open wide and they know that they're actually talking to customers and employees and whatever, and they're feeling like their careers are being enhanced.
Yeah, I mean, I would concur. I think that firstly, the conversation has moved on, and you would have perhaps a better perspective on this than me, but the conversation has moved on based on my conversations here with all our event marketing team, our head of live and so forth. The conversation moved on from being about making stuff happen to actually helping to shape how it happens. And if you take the idea that actually events are a key component part of a corporate, commercial or marketing objective, then actually you're not talking about an event in a moment of time. Of course it is, but actually it's part of a more consolidated approach and communications approach that forms a very important part of what that client organization is doing. So not only are you, there may be a moment in time where you might be putting a CEO on stage and hopefully the mics work and all the basic AV stuff happens. But actually, if you've helped to shape the content, you've helped to demonstrate the effectiveness of that event, and actually you've helped bring it to life for people that either aren't there, can't be there, or would like to see the thought leadership that may have come from it, or the announcements that were made. That could be a year's worth of content and activity. And I think it goes back to the conversation about this business our businesses becoming more strategic, or having the opportunity to do so, because it stops you from being about execution and it moves you back to what's the objective, what do you need to achieve, and actually how will we do that, and what channels are effectively the best way of doing that, and how do you make sure you're maximizing the impact of reach and engagement. And there's obviously technology can play quite a valuable role in that. But yes, I would absolutely agree that I think that events and face-to-face become much more important, and have moved up the agenda strategically, but also in terms of priority. If you think about the number of launches that, say, a pharma company makes, depending on their size, they are so important to their organizations. And so getting it right in terms of getting the key scientific messages across, making sure that everyone is trained effectively, making sure that everyone is aware of the commercial plans, etc., is so important, because with launches maybe you get more than one bite of the cherry, but you rarely do, and that's why I think it becomes more and more important strategically.
Well, interesting. We call these things campaigns all the time, and marketing is campaigns. I use the model that I grew up in Washington, D.C., so I view that I'm the mayor of my niche, and I'm the campaign manager in general, because when you look at the political analogy, they're doing everything from event. The event marketing is a huge piece of it, but they're also cleaning up the trash, and they're creating the strategy, and they're pretty much owning the ecosystem as a community. And so I think that one of the things that we leave out is when we talk about campaigns is that the campaign from a political point of view is more of the analog model than the way we're doing it with just analytics. It's interesting.
I mean, I think it points to an interesting evolution of content, I think, because much more creative or strategic content needs to be delivered in what you might call micro moments. Your ability to serve up bite-sized content that reinforces a point of view or delivers new news, whether it's in learning or training or events. We're seeing the changes in the way that you might need to deliver content and breakouts and plenary sessions and so forth to make sure that people are able to engage with the content and take it on board in ways that are comfortable for them, be it through the use of technology or just creating smaller breakout sessions and so forth. I think the notion that the world that I grew up in 20 years ago or 25 years ago, the notion of the big idea, I would question whether that still stands. Yes, you need values. Yes, you need a culture. Yes, you need a North Star as an organization. You need to deliver that. But ultimately, the way that the content is being disseminated is broken down much more now than it ever has been, I would suggest.
So that's a really interesting change. And it's more complex than that big idea.
Big ideas in some senses used to be like sets of matching luggage, didn't they? So they had to look the same, they had to feel the same graphically if they were graphically represented, or in audio always had to have the same kind of tone of voice and so forth. I think that organizations and the way that they communicate is shifting. I think the way that people receive the information obviously is changing, and the channels can often mean that you need to use a different voice, or you need to have a different point of view that you're able to express in maybe different places. So as a result of that, I think it challenges the notion of, let's call it the big idea, but ultimately your ability to disseminate content as campaigns, as you described, means that with the advent of social media, with the notion of resources, not courses, in the learning space, with the way that actually people want to engage at events, things that, and actually, I would argue that our logistics business is so important in delivering messaging. You could easily think that it's an operational or functional capability, which of course it is at its core, but actually the way that we engage with senior delegates, for a financial organization, the tone of voice, the kind of reception they receive, the way that they're handled to and from and before and after is so important. And those are micro moments, which I think influence the way that a brand is experienced. And we even boil that down now to the way that we measure effectiveness. So, using heat mapping and some degree facial recognition technology to be able to monitor how people move around, anonymously, how they move around a physical space, and to be able to in real time manage that and maybe change the way that a traffic flow might work in an environmental space means that we're constantly making those micro moments change or have the ability to do so.
When you talk about ROI, a lot of the other people I've been talking to, they don't rely anymore on surveys and things like that. They're using a lot more observational research. Are you in that camp as well? Because your surveys are just not accurate.
Well, I wouldn't rule out anything. I think a good evaluation, and I say this as a former strategist and head of strategy at some good communications agency. I think that, as ever, the devil's in the detail.
Sure.
And so a survey in isolation is a blunt tool.
Right. But
a survey alongside your initial reaction, your sense of what the feedback is, the feeling that the client will describe pre, during, and post about how things are going. But more importantly, ethnographic, but actually the ability to look at things through data, like dwell time, like reaction, maybe real-time reaction to different pieces of content, engagement with it pre, during, and post, through online channels, all creates a picture alongside some of the more maybe traditional methods of research. And I think that it's in the whole that you really start to, you're able to piece together how you think an event works, and how an event works, and how much time people have spent in engaging in different areas, but also to provide you with a basis for the next go again, and how to improve, and that sort of constant sense of dissatisfaction to try and make it even better next time.
Right. In fact, the slogan I noticed on your website is "Unusual times call for unusual thinking."
Yep.
And also, there's a I don't know if you've read *Sapiens*, but the author there talks about how experiences are no longer experience once they become mundane. So you have to constantly be raising the bar. What is unusual thinking, and how does that border on being too risky? How do you know when it's too risky and when it's not?
Well, I think for me, it's always about evolution rather than revolution. So, there are lots of reasons why the event industry and the digital industry and film are successful, and a lot of those things still remain true. So it's not that necessarily events need to be completely reinvented, but I do think that some of the conversation we've just had now about micro moments and bite-sized content, the idea that it's not always about the big idea, the idea of using maybe heat mapping to understand how we think something is performing. Those are things that can be built in, and you can dip a toe in the water to see how they work. And our philosophy is very much about try something and see if it works, and if it doesn't, move on. And if it does, then how can you make it work for you even harder? So I think the real truth is that unusual thinking doesn't necessarily need to be about reinvention and changing something wholesale, but it does mean that using learnings from previous experiences. So, for example, something we did recently where we left an entire day of a 3-day meeting for a client with a blank agenda. And that agenda was created in the previous 2 days by the delegates themselves. And the final day was run by the delegates. Now, it takes, it moves you from command and control to connect and collaborate. It means that, you are engaging delegates in ways that maybe they haven't been engaged before. But it also is based on previous learning and experience that enables the clients to have confidence that you've done it before, and actually it's worth it in terms of the metrics that they might get back, but also the response that they'll get from the delegates on the day. And as we talked about earlier, employee engagement is so fundamental that if you do something that makes them feel part of something, then it's got to be worth a try.
I have been completely obsessed recently with this company called Magic Leap that is pioneering spatial computer design, spatial design, and spatial programming and things like that. And it seems to me that future is going to change everything in terms of a room becomes your computer base, and everything is integrated in this 3D world. Do you believe that? Is that something that I'm just sort of like getting too excited?
I think so. My starting point in all these things, and I say this as someone who's spent the last 3.5 years working with virtual reality and increasingly augmented reality as part of our offer. And I think Magic Leap is obviously, a step forward into creating immersive spaces, which is, unbelievably compelling. But I think it comes back to the conversation earlier about the strategic role and the communications objectives. It's easy to fall into the world of providing tech for tech's sake. We've all been there you have a virtual reality experience because you can, rather than because it's got an objective. Now, if I'm able to demonstrate a mode of action for a pharmaceutical product more effectively through virtual reality than I would be through maybe a film, then there is a role and an objective. Augmented reality enables you to enrich content in your own environment. Excuse me. And so you can start to plot out what the objective is and why you would use that technology. And for me, it always comes back to why do you want to, and what objective does it serve, and is it superior to something else that, or everything else that exists?
The one thing let me push back a little bit on that, because I believe that the one thing I forgot to mention is that they called it something that I think is absolutely fundamental to my description, and they called it shared reality. And shared reality was the ability to be in a room and share something, whatever it is, in a much deeper way. So as opposed to augmented reality or virtual reality, the idea that those barriers are there. But if there's a way that you turn a room into a shared reality that is used to enhance every aspect of the experience, and it's not technology, but the purpose of technology is to make what was complex trivial. And so that we make the idea of these 3D models that you see in your hand trivial. And it seems like a future where you don't think of it as technology. Yeah, no, and I think the notion of the phrase I've heard is, or the word you've used is mixed reality. Yeah. Where you are, because the problem with VR and to a degree AR, although less so, is that it is an individual experience. Even if you're watching someone in VR on a screen, it's no fun and it's not that interesting. No. And you do it once and you're done. Yeah, exactly. So, and actually, I would go further with VR, which is that it's a marketing folly. That really, where VR comes into its own is in training and learning. Yep. When you need to learn, in our case, how to use a nuclear submarine, we can provide that experience in virtual reality, and indeed we do for the Royal Navy. So that you can see the role and the purpose. I think mixed reality undoubtedly enables you to have a social and immersive experience, and I'm sure it will become more potent as people become more familiar with the technology and can fit it into their overall sort of approach to how an event or an experience works. And indeed, we're seeing more and more sort of theatrical live event, theatre-based projection mapping, immersive mixed reality type experiences happening, in theatre land. So I'm sure that it will come to something, but it will fundamentally come back to what's the objective, and is it more potent to do that than necessarily maybe creating a breakout. Let me end on the last point is I do believe, and I'm putting my own personal opinion in this, that learning development is one of the key aspects of our business in every form. Like, why do 180,000 people go to Dreamforce? And why will Amazon Web Services get 200,000 people coming to learn how to use their stuff? And how is it learning becoming more exciting and training is becoming more exciting? But the one area that I think that we haven't worked on yet is how to crack the forgetting curve. And I believe that there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that area so that you just don't forget stuff the minute you leave. And there's other ways using technology and using enhanced programming after you leave the event, things like that. Is that something that you agree with me on, or is that something it's not very controversial, but I think that we're not recognizing it as a problem? No, I think it is. I think it is a problem. Actually, I think that a lot of the ways that learning is evolving. So the learning experience platforms, the notion of more mobile learning content, the phrase I used earlier about resources, not courses. The notion that actually you need learning, maybe at a particular moment in time. So it's all very well having the sort of full scale, maybe compliance and regulatory required learning that enables you to demonstrate that you've, from an audit point of view, you've achieved what you need to achieve to be able to handle a certain piece of machinery or, sell a certain product. But then it really comes down to what is useful to you, and then it becomes about adaptability. It comes down to onboarding. It comes down to connectivity, and I think a lot of learning is evolving into those spaces, and that means more micro content. It means more blended learning, so using different channels and content. So whether it's video or meetings and events, or indeed digital content, mobile rich content. I think things are evolving in that space to try and address that forgetting curve.
because it is recognised that sort of, let's call it chalk and talk learning mentality is very historic. And I do think that there are opportunities, which is why we're really pushing on in that space to change the way that learning organisations behave, or learning specific agencies behave, and also to recognise how technology and content can enhance the way that you make stuff more sticky.
Yep. So, Russ, thank you so much for this. I love the fact that you don't know it all, but you are curious about everything, and that you like the idea that putting your people in a place that makes them have to be innovative is very refreshing, especially when somebody at the leadership level of a big organization. So I thank you so much, and hope to continue this conversation. Thanks.
Thank you very much. No, enjoyed our chat.
Thanks.
Thanks to Russ Lidstone for joining us this week. Now, here's where David usually asks me what's new at BizBash. Well, the big news for BizBash as a company is that we announced on December 2nd that BizBash has been acquired by Tarsus Connect. A few highlights of this change are that David will transition to a new role as chairman, and our events will join Connect's own wide-ranging portfolio of more than 30 events. Editorially, we will still be covering meetings and events, industry news and trends on the web, in print, and on social media. For more information, you can read the press release, which is on our social feeds. Find it at BizBash. Thanks to our producer, Dave Nelson, Claire Hoffman from our editorial team, and Rebecca Pappas, who heads audience development, for their work on GatherGeeks. Until next week, gather on.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or your favorite podcast app. We can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Player FM, Google Play, and Pocket Cast. Be sure to leave us a rating and review. It helps others discover the GatherGeeks podcast. We'd also love to hear from you. You can leave feedback on Twitter at GatherGeeks, or leave us an email, gathergeeks@bizbash.com. We hope you'll join us again for the next episode of GatherGeeks. Until then, gather on.